For the record, we're apparently live on RCTV already.
Do we want to call this to order? I mean, I think I just did the count. There's 6 FinCom members. So I can call our meeting to order. And then Mark, did you want to call the select board?
Yes, please. Thanks, Ed. I'd like to call the select board to order.
Chuck?
So, yeah, I'll call the school committee to order. Roll call. Sean?
Here.
Tom?
Here.
Aaron?
Here.
Carla?
Here.
John?
Here.
And Chuck is here.
Okay, Ed, if I may, I have sort of a PowerPoint that you can talk to in the background.
Okay.
If I find out how to do it here. Can everyone see the agenda?
Yep.
Okay, all yours, Ed.
Sure. Thanks everybody for joining the Financial Forum. So just I had a kind of a quick, just a couple quick housekeeping items before we get going. Jackie sent around the we voted on this, or we talked about this last meeting, the liaison assignments, and just for everyone's benefit that had a chance to review them, if you can just let her and I know if there's anything that needs to be changed. You don't necessarily have to do it now. And I know I had a couple correspondence back and forth with Nick on his on what he wants to choose, and once we get all that kind of squared away, then we can kind of have that officially and have that all kind of updated and posted. On that side, I guess I can stop for a second. If anyone did have any questions, they can ask it now, or if there had any changes.
Ed, if it's helpful, I can share the list of liaisons on the screen.
Might as well. I made the assumption that everyone has it in front of them because it was in the packet.
Yep. Let's see.
So can everyone see that? Anybody have any questions? I'm going to take that as a no. And then if I'm going through the list of participants, I'm just making sure the only one we don't have on that group is, I believe it's Nick, right? I think everyone else is on. So cool. Okay, I just was kind of going through and checking all the names. So I think we have 8 of us now. So that's fine. And then Nick's the one that's that had to kind of circle back on his assignments anyway. So I think we're fine there. And then so then the next item that we had on the agenda, Bob, was to look at the authorize both FinCom and Select Board to vote and to authorize the spending in the revolving funds.
Sure.
That's
So
correct.
I can go over that.
Perfect.
Last year, rewinding to April, May, June period of time, you'll recall that we did a condensed version of town meeting in June. And we did that I don't know, based on priorities, based on what made sense, and in some cases based on executive orders or COVID orders that had been issued by the state. I missed a subtlety on one of them. Mass general law in general, in normal times, requires a vote before July 1st at annual town meeting, presumably, to establish spending limits of revolving funds, and we typically do that every year. In April of last year, there was as you can see, an act passed which permitted municipalities to use the same level of revolving funds in FY20 during FY21. What I failed to realize or understand at the time was that was only true until the town adopted an annual budget, and it was especially designed at municipalities that weren't going to do that before June 30th. So once the town adopted an annual budget, that loophole, if you will, did not exist anymore. So effectively right now, we have a series of revolving funds I'll show you with a spending authorization of 0 for this year. Now, under this other chapter of Mass General Law, the limits on the spending can be changed by a joint vote of the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. So we sort of figured that out in July or so, and there was no urgency to call a special meeting. We just thought we'd wait for a financial forum. So town council's last sentence is, I therefore advise both public bodies to consider voting to increase the expenditure limit from 0 on the town's revolving funds. So here are the revolving funds in question, and these are the same annual spending limits that were in the draft warrant article last April. So there's no change, there's no request for a change. We would just like someone to move that motion that's shown. And if you don't mind, by roll call vote, both FinCom and the board and the select board could vote on this to so authorize. It's pretty important. Some of these things are supporting our budget. And then some of these things, such as $25,000, is available to the Board of Health and the Health Division. So that's the background, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Can I ask a question, Bob, on the public health clinics and services? Would it make sense to increase that limit from 25,000?
You know, Mark, that's a really good question. I don't see any harm in it. So, yeah.
I think we should. I think that
I will add that there are limits, and I haven't shown you here, but there are limits on what those can be spent. It's not designed for COVID, but it could be designed for health clinics, flu clinics, for instance. But it's a fairly tight definition. But again, your point is well taken, and this, I certainly don't see any harm in it, but it can't be used for anything.
is it possible to find out if it could be used for COVID clinics?
Yes. Well, Sharon has been asked, and she said no.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Come on, Sharon. So in that case, would we need its own fund, or is there another way to fund those clinics?
Well, this revolving fund does fund clinics. So if there, for instance, were a COVID vaccine, that would certainly fall within the parameters of this. So I don't mean to suggest it can't do anything with COVID, but for instance, it can't buy, masks or supplies unless it's related to an event they are holding.
Right. So if there was a testing event.
So if there's a testing event, if there's a vaccine event, I would say that's highly appropriate, but it's really up to Sharon.
The definition we have here is it's for clinics, charges, and third-party reimbursements for materials and costs associated with clinics and public health programs. That's the description.
Sounds like that COVID or flu would certainly fit that definition. So can I make a motion, if that's the right thing, to increase the limit on public health clinics and services from 25,000 to, let's say, 50,000?
Hi, this is Karen Herrick. I would second that motion.
And can I just get clarity on if, let's say that that's more than enough to fund any clinics. The money just stays in the revolving account if we don't use it. So it doesn't strike me as any harm in upping that limit, because in the event that there were a COVID vaccine, or we had, like, I can see this eventuality where we would need the money, but I'm also reassured that in the event that we don't, it just stays in the revolving account. So I'm very comfortable with this.
Hey, Bob, just a quick question, just in general, and it's not necessarily about changing the spending cap that we just did on that one, but can you just talk to what the, like, so you have the 3 columns here. What does the balance, kind of represent, and how does that compare to the annual spending? There's different balances here. Is that what's left over from before? I'm just curious.
Sharon, I assume that's a June 30th balance?
Actually, I gave them balances as of this week.
Oh, okay.
And talked about them. So what's in there currently is what is listed.
And do we have a general idea as far as what happens year over year, like to that, like do we always spend to that, how does the balance, is there any kind of history to that balance versus what is in the cap in the 3rd column?
Well, if we don't have it in there, we can't spend it, obviously. And we tend to carry a balance in the public health clinics because, there's money going into there regularly, whereas you've got Meteric Health and the town forest where there isn't anything in there, so you wouldn't spend anything. So there's regularly in most of these revolving funds sources of funding that are coming in on a regular basis, so they're very much always changing, obviously. So right now they're at 51,735. There's enough in there to cover the whole annual spending limit, but there will be more money going in there throughout the year. I mean, it's pretty early in the year, so I can't tell you how much we spend every year on the clinics because I didn't prep for that question, but I could certainly find out for you.
Yeah, just a curiosity, just, kind of given that, I mean, again, it's, it's all in the, it's kind of the umbrella of just trying to figure out what we do know, what we don't know, given all these kind of unsettling times. So just more curious than anything else. I don't know if it necessarily means, much as far as changing things, but it's just something that I think would be, kind of good to understand, given I think what we expect would be some tougher conversations kind of going forward around, just revenues and spending across the board.
Can I ask another question? And I apologize, Bob, I think you may have answered this and I didn't quite hear it. The proposed spending from the revolving funds, how does that relate to the prior fiscal year? Is it the same except for the 50 that we just added? Are there any swings one way or the other?
Same as FY20.
Okay.
And same as proposed last April at town meeting before we tabled the article, except for the health.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments around the spending limits around the revolving funds? Or is there an order that we need to do these, Bob? Does it matter?
I think the motion above can be sufficient, and then it'll sweep in the amounts under the annual spending. I don't think you have to read that.
Excuse me, do we, is the motion on the table to vote on the increase of the 50, or would we vote on the whole thing now?
It's up to you. It was proposed as a friendly amendment, which would not require a vote, so it's really up to all of you.
Okay. Up to Ed.
Yeah, let's,
technically a motion hasn't been made yet, so. Oh, or was it? Maybe it was.
I think it might
no,
have been.
Mark did.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark did. Mark
Yeah.
did. Yep.
All right, okay. I think there was a second, so yeah.
Oh,
So
sorry.
I second it, and then afterwards, should the select board make the motion or the finance committee? So I'm not sure
Both.
either.
Doesn't
Okay.
matter.
Yeah, that was
Okay.
that was more my question. The order of it. Did one of us have to do it first?
Oh,
versus the other?
I see. It doesn't matter. You're acting as a body of the whole right now, combined.
So do you want to do a roll call of FinCom and then we'll do a roll call of Select Board?
Okay. So do we? So then we have to move pursuant to, so this is the sentence, right, Bob? Pursuant to section 53, E1-2 of the chapter 44 of the Mass General Law to increase the amount that may be spent from the town's revolving funds as outlined on the document entitled FY21 revolving fund limits dated. And what is the date? It's dated today.
Well, it's actually, I'd suggest you read the motion here on the screen.
Oh, geez, I'm sorry. I was reading the one that you sent, that you sent in the other letter. Okay, so move pursuant to section 53E 1/2 of chapter 44 of the Mass General Law to increase the amount that may be spent from town's revolving funds as outlined below. And so then we're going to go through a vote, correct? And so I'll go and do a roll call.
You need a second first, Ed.
Oh yeah, can I get a second?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Gene.
Sure.
I'm showing my greenness, Mark. I just run roughshod over parliamentary procedures. So let's go ahead. Now we'll go to the vote. Andrew.
Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
Eric.
Yes.
Marianne.
Yes.
Mark.
Yes.
Sean.
Yes.
Gene.
Yes.
And myself, Ed. That's yes. That's 8-0.
And let me do the same thing if I could for the select board. We've got a motion that's already been seconded, so let me do a roll call in order I'm seeing you on the screen. So Carlo?
Yes.
Vanessa?
Yeah.
Karen?
Yes.
And Mark, yes. And that last person who's on the phone, that's not Ann, correct?
No, I think that's Eric.
Okay.
And Ed, this is Nick.
2887 is me.
Ed, this is Nick. I'm also here as well. It's a yes.
Oh, hey Nick. I'm sorry, I missed you, buddy. Sorry about
No,
that.
sorry, I called in and then I had trouble with the audio, so sorry about that.
So can can I go back and get Nick's vote?
It's a yes.
All right, so then we have Nick's vote. I don't like to leave anybody out, Bob. So yeah, so we got 9-0 on FinCom.
Thank you.
And select board 4-0.
So at this point, if you're ready, Sharon will kind of launch into the financial portion of the meeting.
That'd be great. Thanks, Sharon.
I figured I would start off by giving you the results of operations for fiscal 20, what we're seeing for regeneration for revenues and expenses. So this first slide here is showing you that we had $1 million of revenues collected over projection. You will note that there's a line there in red. It is not a regeneration number, but it is something I wanted to highlight just because it's unusual for us. In the last several years, motor vehicle excise tax has always been a source of regeneration, and this year we came in $313,000 under projection. So I figured I would point that out, even though it really doesn't help our regeneration. Obviously, the charges for services and property taxes, those are in green because I feel that those regeneration numbers could very possibly be regenerated in the current year. And then the numbers for investment income, delinquent taxes, and miscellaneous are all in black. And I look at those as potentially some of it could be regenerated, but we don't count on it. Investment income has been trending upward the last few years, and we've seen great regeneration numbers. At that 678,000, that's quite a bit. But what I'm seeing in fiscal 21 is very different, lower interest rates and definitely trailing even the projection that we reduced. So I just wanted to mention that, you know, about half of that regeneration may be there for the current year, and it's unknown with the others. Delinquent taxes we never budget for because once something is overdue over a year, you just don't know when you're going to get it, and it's a very up and down number. And miscellaneous is just general stuff that comes in that we're not sure are coming.
So Sharon, on this one, for like for the ones that are in black, do you and apologies for not recalling this from last year, but is there an assumption that's already made for, say, investment income and delinquent taxes, like that you automatically kind of look at year over year?
We're always looking at how it's trending and how projections are doing in the current year that we're in compared to budget. I mentioned investment income because it has been, in the last few years, a very big return on regeneration, but I don't think it will be at all in fiscal 21, because in later slides, you'll see what I'm asking you to do with the projection, because I'm asking you to bring it way down. The first couple months are definitely not to the level of what we have for our current projection. So we're always kind of just keeping an eye on, the average over the last 5 years, what's currently going on in the current year, what happened in the most recent past closed year, and kind of adjusting accordingly, based on what we're seeing. And so that's why I say investment income maybe in other years, I might have said a good portion of it may be regenerated, but I'm thinking we're going to see it go down. And so that's why I put it in black, because I do feel like we might have some regeneration, but it would be small, I would guess. So that's just my conservative look at it. So looking at it, looks like half of it I can say, we probably could regenerate half of $1 million next year. The 822, questionable. Those are all kind of one-offs for this year. I don't think investment income will be there. Delinquent taxes, we normally have something there. It's so up and down. We don't budget for it. So it definitely is regeneration if we get delinquent taxes. But it's just hard to say what those will be because they're overdue taxes.
So when you looked at the excise taxes, you didn't factor that in. You just looked at mostly sustainable and then one-offs, and you kind of put the excise tax along with it.
Only the green ones do I say are sustainable, and motor vehicle
Gotcha.
is one of those that would typically be in the green, and it is.
Gotcha.
This is the first year in many years that we're seeing motor vehicle come in under budget. So,
Gotcha. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Can I ask a question on the excise tax? Is that 313,000 less than the bills that went out, or?
No, 313,000 less than what we projected.
Wow.
And that doesn't happen a lot. So I figured it's important to note because it's an area where we normally see a couple $100,000 come back to us, and this year it's not the case.
Right. Okay.
Sharon, a question on the investment income. Do you know what the run rate's been the last few months?
I do not. The treasurer does that. I kind of got the.
I think it's between like 30 and 40 grand.
Actually, I want to say it was 26 now that I think about it. Yeah, 26,000. But I don't know what the interest rate is that we're getting on a lot of these investments. I guess that's what I thought he was asking. And we were getting some very favorable interest rates and returns. Some of this money is invested in CDARS, which are like a CD registry program. And we had some very favorable terms to get some really good returns. And now that the interest rates are going down, we're not seeing those returns. So I feel like it's pretty safe to say investment income is not going to look like this next year.
And just to point out that Sharon is going to describe FY21 revenues in a future slide. So you'll be hearing this again.
Yes, definitely. So next slide, please. Whoops. There we go. So the expenses for fiscal 20 came in 2.87 million under budget. 1.25 million is related to accommodated cost items such as capital, the FinCom reserves that we increased. We did not use any of those. 300,000 came all the way back. Employee benefits, which I think 115,000 of that was related to health insurance, but I think something like 140,000 was Medicare. So we had some open positions, and Medicare obviously was down because we had a lot of open positions. So that's the accommodated cost portion. Capital, I have a listing of some of the things. There's not a lot of big things in there. 150,000 of it is the permanent building committee. We always give them 150,000 to work with in case something should come up and they need to spend some money to determine a direction to go. And frequently that is, turned back. And I think I recall there was about 100,000 on a fire engine that was turned back because the fire engine came in under what we had projected. So in the area of the school department, about 471,000 was turned back, majority of which is in school special ed. In the other side of things for town, it was over $1 million, $1.15 million, the majority of which are found in the area of salaries. public safety being the largest at like, I want to say it was like 495,000 of those term dates were in public safety. As you recall, we did have the police chief position open for a period of time, and then when Chief Clark was promoted, his position as deputy chief was left vacant, and so we had quite a bit of turn back in those two lines alone. There was some turn back in the police and in the firefighters, just the general police officers and firefighters. So that was a big area where regeneration was found. Public services had about $75,000 worth of regeneration, and then I want to say it was public works at about 100,000. So there was quite a bit going on there with open positions, or for a period of time where they weren't able to hire. And then the SAFER grant was kind of an unexpected thing. The SAFER grant was to cover 5 firefighters, and we had learned about it, I want to say sometime in fiscal 19. We did get some funding in fiscal 19, and we had it flowing in as a revenue because we wanted to show all the firefighters in our budget, so when the grant goes away, they're not like distorting our budget. And the auditors were looking at it saying that's a federal grant and it's a large grant. We really prefer you to do it differently. And so we didn't budget the way I had to show it for fiscal 20, which was support in the salary area. And so that whole $219,000 goes back to free cash. But it would have gone back to free cash the way we had planned it. We were going to have it come in as revenue. So either way, it would have come back in one way or another because it wasn't built into our budget. I believe we might have already been in the cycle for fiscal 20 when we learned we were getting it. And we already had a balanced budget. So we didn't end up doing anything to increase our revenue projection. So it would have turned back as revenue as well. And then the town expenses at 259, all various small items adding up to the $259,000. If you would move to the next slide, please.
Sharon, just to give you a quick pause, and I probably should have done a better job of this when we first started out. If since there's so many folks on, if they do, if you have your hands raised, I will, with Jackie's help, look out for those, and so folks can ask questions. So I'm bringing this up because I've already missed 2 people that raised their hand. Okay. So if you can, Sharon, I think Vanessa had a question, and it might be related to the last slide. So that's how late I was on seeing it.
I did. Thanks, Ed. No worries. My question was on the previous slide, Sharon, if you don't mind going back. Also, hello. It's lovely to see you.
Hi, lovely to see you too.
My question was the charge for services. Apologies if you touched on this and I missed it. The $234,000 over estimate seems significant to me. What does that consist of, and what were the services that we were charging for?
So I can give you a breakout of what makes that up. So for charges for services, we had $56,000 over projection for police details, administrative fees that we charge for police details. We had $99,000 over projection for ambulance. Building inspections was over $47,000. Electrical, $21,000, and inspections certificates, $10,000. So we do frequently see ambulance come in above. That's usually a good contributor there. And that's why I say a lot of the ones I'm seeing are ones that I see frequently. Ambulance being one of the ones I see more frequently in that category. But that would be all of them, the big ones that are. Does that help?
It's very helpful. Thank you.
And Karen, I think you had your hand up as well.
Thank you, Ed. Sharon, I had a follow-up question. If you have any insight into the reduction in motor vehicle excise taxes, can you tell commercial versus consumer? Was it literally because people couldn't buy new cars this year?
I actually have a feeling on it, and it may actually turn around in fiscal 21. Based on what I could see that we charge for demand fees for motor vehicle excise, I think where people had that extension to pay their property tax, motor vehicle until June, I feel like people forgot about their motor vehicle excise bills. It seemed like we had a very high number of demand fees as it rolled into July because we weren't charging any demands or anything like we normally would have. And so all those overdue bills, I feel like people just forgot that they still hadn't paid them because it's a once a year bill. I don't think we used PKS to send out our motor vehicle excise bills. We did not have anything set up with them to send a second bill as June 30th approached. And unless people were signed up for our electronic, they probably didn't get reminders. So that's the one thing I will say is kind of unfortunate because we don't normally see an extension like what we had this year. And I do think, unfortunately, that some people just forgot to pay the bill. I mean, it could be hardship. It could be that people just not getting a reminder just simply forgot.
Sure. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
So we've been through this slide. Okay. So I'm estimating, and this is not certified and it's not a final number because there's still a piece of the calculation for free cash that I have not completed. If we have funds that are in deficit at June 30th, we have to deduct them from free cash because it's as if they borrow from the general fund, but we don't have to deduct them if we receive the money by September 30th. So we're not at September 30th, so I'm not done looking at that, so I can't really fill that number in. It's not usually a large number. But with what I do have thus far, which is the regeneration for revenues and expenses, and knowing what we spent from free cash since we had it last certified, we're looking at about $15 million, about $600,000 less than what we had last year. But we did use quite a bit of free cash, so I feel like that's, a pretty strong number. And this slide shows you other reserves that we have available to us, such as the stabilization fund at 1.7, and then the FinCom reserves that we recently increased to 300,000, giving us over $17 million of reserves. That represents 16.4% of our fiscal 21 projected revenues, which is well in excess of our minimum of 7%. Next slide, please. This slide gives us a 5-year free cash analysis, and it shows you what we had at the beginning of each fiscal year certified by BOR, and then it shows you the regeneration for revenues over budget, expenses under budget, so those two components, and then also what we spent for free cash that fiscal year. And then that last line there, the other adjustments to free cash, that's the piece I haven't done yet. It's, state grants and things like that typically will end in a negative because they're reimbursement in nature. We spend the money, we apply for reimbursement from the state or federal government, and then we don't have to deduct all of them because frequently we get most of the money back by September 30th. So that kind of shows you the growth of free cash over the last 5 years. You can see it was, up and down a little bit. We had fiscal 17 being a year that it actually went down and then went up again, and now we're down again. But those were heavy use years. If you look at what we were using for free cash in those years, it was over $4 million. So we're really strong in free cash at this point, which is helpful given what we have going on. So, next slide, please. So now based on what we know about fiscal 20, I thought it would be prudent to look at and revisit the fiscal 21 revenue projections that we had, because I feel like now we have a little bit more information about how things turned out in fiscal 20. And, we had kind of the majority of the year at the time that we revisited the fiscal 21. Based on what we saw in fiscal 20, just to be conservative, I felt like we should reduce our projection just a little bit more. We had moved it down to 3.75 million, but we didn't see even 3.7 last year. So I felt that $50,000 reduction to our projection would be prudent at this point, especially where DOR is really kind of prompting us to be more conservative because state aid is so up in the air. For property taxes, we do have good news there because new growth was certified at 967,303, which is over $367,000 more than what we had projected. So that's an add at November town meeting for additional revenue. And we did get some word from the state, basically stating to us that they wanted to place a floor on two of the larger pieces of state aid. The first being Chapter 70, which is the educational piece, saying that we get no less than what we got in fiscal 20, and also the unrestricted general government aid. And they were going to leave those at least what was in fiscal 20, and they projected a number for us. And using those numbers, we can safely increase our state aid projection that was at $13.4 million to $14.4 million, giving us another $1 million to work with in fiscal 21. Next slide.
And Sharon, sorry, this is Ed again. Just on that slide. So then, on the state aid piece, just so I have it, that's an addition, $1 million over what you had budgeted before.
Yeah, we were very conservative as we went to June town meetings, what we were projecting revenue-wise, knowing that the pandemic was going on and so much was going on, and we were very, I guess, pessimistic about what state aid would look like given what we were hearing. And so we went with a 13.4, and it looks like the number is going to be 14.4, a little bit higher if it comes out the way they say. The thing that's challenging here is that they're still not finalized in their budget. They seem to be committing to keeping this floor for those two items, Chapter 70 and the unrestricted aid, general aid. But you wonder how they're going to do it. But that's what they're giving us as numbers, and they're committing to, or it seems to be committing to, and that's where we're getting that number. I'm sure Bob will talk a little bit more at length later about that.
Yeah, and I guess that was my question as far as how. Yeah, again, I know this it could change, kind of hour to hour, but so Bob, are you going to talk? Maybe talk to that a little bit. I can save that question for later then.
Honestly, Ed, I may as well do it now. On Tuesday of this week, I was on a call with the state. The state has been very good about sort of keeping us informed on a wide variety of topics with a Zoom meeting. It's been weekly for a long time, and they've just cut it back in the last 6 weeks or so to a little less often. But specifically, Sean Cronin, who's the senior deputy commissioner of the DLS, went over state aid on Tuesday, and the two numbers Sharon is showing as sort of guaranteed or having a floor on them are shown. So there's a $500,000 increase in the school's funding and a $600,000 increase in general government funding. And as you can see, it was quite a bit higher than what we had projected. I asked a question trying to get at the how real this was, and Sean had said I don't want to put words in his mouth, but there are no cherry sheets right now. And a cherry sheet is the details of all the state aid and then some offsets, some things we pay. And historically, it's always been an essential part of setting the tax rate. And so he said this year, I understand communities are going to start setting their tax rate soon. Do the best you can in case we still don't have cherry sheets, since we don't have a state budget. That was a little bit concerning. He did say, please be very conservative with your budgeting. But then Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito spoke up and reiterated what has been their historical strong support of cities and towns. And they are saying they are very committed to those two numbers, increasing for Reading. And, they have been terrific. I have to say that. I believe what they say. But I also am aware that the state still does not have a budget that's balanced and passed. So the state aid figures Sharon showed you are a little bit lower than what you see here. We decided to take $150,000 and put it aside in case the state can't quite make their commitment. So that's kind of the story on state aid. My comment would be, I don't know how they're going to keep this level of state aid unless they get federal aid. If there's no additional federal aid coming, I'm not quite sure what they're going to do. And on the call, I raised the possibility of mid-year 9C cuts, which the governor can do with certain limits. And that is normally a January, February mid-year kind of adjustment. And they said, that's so far ahead, we can't see that far. And then the lieutenant governor added that October was when they usually started their budget process for next year. And they're nowhere near that. They're still trying to figure out how to pass a balanced budget for the current year. So, it is very good news that they're committed to giving us $1 million more. And I believe that, but there has to be an asterisk that we have to be careful. Their intentions are good. Their financial reality is still undefined.
So, given that, I mean, I guess the question that I have, is there any harm in not, using that floor and just using what you had forecasted in June?
I think that'll be the discussion and sort of later in the slide presentation, Ed. It's a fair question, certainly. There's no good answer, but it's going to be a judgment call of all of you.
Gotcha. Good. Thanks for that, Bob. Any other questions for Bob on that piece? I don't see anything in the.
I think Chuck has a hand raised.
Sorry, I was on mute. So Bob, on the state, did they talk about the rainy day fund at all?
No, they didn't. And that certainly has to be the big source of the gap that they have in the budget.
So they could theoretically end up using that to maintain their commitment to the cities and towns.
They could, absolutely. Finance in the calls we've had, since the pandemic have clearly been in the back seat. It's, you got to save people's lives, do what you need to do. And so really there hasn't been much discussion of finance. And I understand that and I respect that. I don't know if their rainy day fund is large enough to plug what could be the total budget gap they have for this year, though. But I know they will do their level best, is all we can say.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. So these are some others that I'm looking to kind of reduce our revenue projections based on what I'm seeing. And I alluded to in the first slide that interest earnings are not looking like they're going to make the 775 that we currently have projected. I'm looking at 375, which is a $400,000 reduction onto that line item. And then licenses and permits, kind of a smaller thing, but 160 seems more doable, and so a $5,000 reduction there. Medicaid reimbursements has been trending down for the last few years, and we feel that $100,000 is a better number given what we saw in fiscal 20 and what we've been seeing over the last few years. That's a reduction of $75,000. So there's about $530,000 worth of reductions, but then we also have the add of the new growth and the add of the state aid. So there's definitely still extra based on we have more adds than we have reductions in projection.
So Sharon, on that, just circling back on that interest earnings again, and so you were saying that that those were CDARs and you had favorable rates. So are those kind of like something that's is it? I guess the question is it sensitive or completely tied to the current interest rate environment, and then you would see that being as long as interest rates stay in this kind of a similar band, then this is what it's going to look like if we're in a kind of prolonged.
Yes, I'm actually looking at it in two ways, what the interest rates are that we're currently getting, and if interest rates stay low and we continue to see returns that we're seeing the last couple of months, I'm projecting out somewhere in that 360, 370 area. So bringing it down to 375 might even be still a little bit high, but we're not seeing what we saw last year, and I can see that now, and it's prudent to make that adjustment now.
Great, thank you.
Next slide. Oops. All right. So this is the fiscal 21 revenue projection. We've got $105.8 million, and it's broken down by category. You can see that we've added in the new growth at $367,000. more than what was originally projected. Property taxes being up 3.6% over prior year, and that is with that new growth number in there. And you can see that I've reduced other local revenues by 530,000, down 7.3% from the prior year. And then we're looking to add the $1 million based on what we've heard from the state and the floor commitment that they're seeming to have to keep us kind of more steady with where we were in prior year. So that's a 1% reduction over the prior year. And then the other transfers and available funds is a reduction of 1.1. You can see a drastic increase in free cash at 108.2% of what we used in the prior year. I think we were actually 2,082,000, but it's rounded up to 2.1. So it is a high use of free cash that we had in fiscal 21. So it's, you know, obviously we didn't, I think we used a million last year. So yeah. The next slide, please. So for fiscal 22, these are the projected revenues we have, leaving free cash as a to be determined kind of item. We've got property taxes going up 3.4%, and other local revenues at 6.6%, state aid kind of flat, and then other kind of flat too. I mean, others actually was 3.9 something in fiscal 21 and more closer to 4 in fiscal 22, but still a reduction, or the other way around, 4 million and then down to 3.9. So still a reduction of 1.1%. So the answer that we'll need to have when we're building the fiscal 22 budget is how much free cash do we feel comfortable using? And that kind of helps set the tone for how we build our budget. Next slide. This is the projected revenues from fiscal 20 to fiscal 22. You can see that we had a 3% increase from fiscal 20 to fiscal 21. And right now, and that was with the free cash use, but it was only 1.9 without. We have a 3% increase based on what we're seeing right now for fiscal 22, but without free cash use, it would only be 0.9 because we've got to keep up that level of 2,082,000 or more to even get back to the 3%. So that number is frequently something that we get guidance from FinCom about what we feel comfortable about, and it really drives us in building that fiscal 22 budget. Next slide. We already talked about this slide, it's the floor. And then this is our budget adjustments that we used to close the gap back in June. We had a $930,000 reduction to capital, but on town meeting floor, they actually added back $50,000 for curb and sidewalk, I believe. So it ended up only being $880, using free cash as the buffer. Shared cost was $708,850. That's OPEB and pension. We had reductions in both OPEB. I think OPEB was like $400,000. Pension, do I have it in front of me? $283,580. We had actually worked something out with the retirement board to reduce because we were going in very high with pension contribution. We thought we had a strong position to do that. We got them to reduce it by $283,580. It's not knowing the pandemic was coming. So we had several items under the 708, 125 from health insurance premiums, 25,000 from snow and ice, 30,000 from unemployment, and 30,000 was an increase from unemployment and 95,000 increase for vocational ed. So that's what made up that shared cost, although I did not have space to put all that. And then for town and school operating budgets, we had reduced the budgets by 282. But on town meeting floor, you can see 125 was to come from the town, 157 coming from the school. On town meeting floor, $14,000 of salaries was added back, I believe, for public services. I want to say it was the elder services position that we had opened that we were going to reduce hours, and they added back. So the number ended up only being 268, but again, we used a little bit more free cash to make that up. So you'll see that the free cash use that we used to fill that gap went up to 832,000. So we were about just under $2.7 million that we reduced our spending to fill that gap and increased our free cash use. The next slide. And this is where we are for November town meeting. So we have One item that I'm seeing that is definitely in need of a transfer for whatever reason, and I haven't identified the reason yet, but property and casualty came in high for the town and the school side. And so we need a $50,000 transfer. I have a question out for that. We also have DPW rubbish requesting another $75,000, so $125,000 is needed. But as you can see, we had additional revenues from new growth at 367,303 and an additional $1 million of state aid, reductions of 530 that I proposed. So we had 837,303 of additional revenues. So we have 712,303 that we have to decide how do we want to spend that money. So that's where we are right now. Could we want to add back anything that we reduced is kind of the theme here, is why we kind of showed you what we cut on the prior side, to see if there's anything that you'd want to add back, or would you just want to reduce free cash? Would, you know, just get a feel and a conversation going about how do we spend that money.
So at this point, I'm going to go back to that previous slide in a minute, because that's really the discussion point for tonight. But I also want to help you look ahead to the next two financial forums. On October 7th, I need the Finance Committee to vote November town meeting articles in order to get it in print in time to distribute it to town meeting members. So October 7th is really a focus on the current fiscal year. And once that's disposed of, FinCom can certainly move to other issues. And then October 21st is, a focus more on the budget process over the winter and the future. Certainly, if you can accomplish more on October 7th, there's no problem. But again, to get in print for the warrant, your vote should be October 7th. So we're going to do our best to firm up some choices here. As Sharon mentioned, the 50,000 and the 75,000 are necessary this year for sure. I believe the PNC number is more of a permanent number. The rubbish is really hard to know. Jane Kinsella today was reviewing that with me and wondering when we should ask for the money, because it's clearly needed this year. And I think the best guess that I would have is we should ask for it now and make it a baseline figure for the future. A lot of people are home, and a lot of people are cleaning their basement, and a lot of people are throwing out a lot of stuff. And we pay a tipping fee based on tonnage. So, I view this as a permanent cost until someone shows me otherwise. And then under capital, I've asked all the departments, including the schools, for their priorities, and we have a list that I can share with you at the next meeting or in advance of the next meeting of about $270,000 of capital. There's some equipment from the fire department that if they had only known it was going to go bad in June, they did not need to return the $100,000 on the fire engine because it's equipment related to a fire engine, but they're going to need $90,000. There's two land use projects that the select board have asked for that we deferred in June that total about $80,000. And then there's a DPW piece of equipment, a hot box machine, so that they can patch potholes in the winter pretty effectively. Those are the only ones that have risen to the level of it would be really nice to have this at November. And then I have a question on the Voc schools. I want to circle back. I know one of them sent us kind of a large enrollment number projection, but I don't think they know until after October 1st in a normal year. So that's unclear. We did increase Voc school budget last June, and I really expected that to take care of it, but I guess we'll just say stay tuned. So the discussion, as Sharon highlighted, and I'll add Ed's question or Ed's comment. First is, what do you do with the state aid? Do you use $1 million or not? And then, whenever you decide that question, how much is left, assuming there's something left, and what do you do with it? And, we just, again, Sharon went over the lists. We reduced OPEB, I believe, from 500,000 or so to 100,000 for the current year. So certainly that could be increased. And that's not building a base in your budget for the future that's not sustainable. We can add capital. I just described to you 270 odd thousand that's possible at November. There might be something else that comes along that's not on this list in the next couple of weeks, or even potentially just before November town meeting. And lastly, but certainly importantly, you can choose to reduce the use of free cash that's over 2 million. So those are the decisions that FinCom, I'd like to get a lot of feedback to FinCom in 2 weeks. All the town department heads will be present and able to have a discussion on any of the items in detail and the priorities. There has not, you'll notice there's not been anything listed for COVID. That's because the town has $2 million or so in one grant that's available through December 31st. We're actually going to review that next Monday at a command meeting. And I don't think, as I sit here today, that we have a need for the current year for COVID expenses. And about 15 minutes after I have said things like that, it changes. So you just don't know. But I think we're okay. For now, things could change, certainly, even between now and November or next April. So that kind of wraps up the discussion on the short term and the current fiscal year. But I do want to just throw out a couple comments that are a little longer term for the budget process in the winter. And I'd ask FinCom members just to start thinking about it. How much free cash are you comfortable using? You saw the balance. You saw that, in a crisis last year, we bumped it over 2 million. Historically, it's been closer to 1 to 1.5 million for recent years. And another question that unfortunately, I think is still relevant is how important is 5% debt and capital? John and I, it's really too early to say much about future budgets, but you saw that with no free cash, it's less than 1%, which would be extremely difficult. And with a high amount of free cash, it could be as high as 3%, but I'm going to say it's less likely to be that. I'll speak for myself, and John can do likewise. People are what make the organization more than equipment. So I would have a short-term preference for not cutting positions if we can reduce some capital spending. But over a period of time, I would change my tune and say we can't let the equipment suffer. We have to at some point cut people. I don't feel like I'm there today. But again, if the state budget doesn't turn out well, we certainly could get there next winter. So that's all we have for tonight, Ed. And certainly any discussion that's helpful for tonight that can help guide us for the next 2 meetings would be great. And I know there's some hands raised.
Cool. Yeah, so I'll, yeah, I see the hands raised now. I don't know the order in which they were raised, but I'll go with Chuck. So you're the first one I see here.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Bob, I just had, so I see the things that I just want to make sure I understand that. So theoretically, what's going to be reduced from that 712 of the 2 TBD items, which we don't. So the capital one, we have a lot of control over what that number will be. The one that bothers me a little bit is the vote schools, because that's a wild card. That do you have any sense as to when we're going to know that?
John, do you know anything?
So we received, I believe, the Essex Tech numbers, but I haven't seen anything yet from Northeast or the couple of students that we have in Minuteman. So I don't know. We haven't seen anything else.
Yeah, and my recollection is the school in Wakefield is fine because they do it on a lag basis, so we know factually what that is. Who knows about next year, but that's for this year. John, my recollection was the Essex number was higher than we thought it would be.
Yeah, I want to say it was, don't quote me, I think it was 10.
Yeah,
and we were thinking less than that.
But they can't confirm that. That was 10 applications, I guess. And they can't, John, do they count kids on October 1st in a typical year?
Yeah, and this year the state is continuing to use the October 1st enrollment date. So that's not changing.
So Chuck, we should know a Voc School number to some degree in time for November town meeting.
Well, I guess the reason why I ask is, so you've asked FinCom to give you some guidance as to how to spend that 712 figure. And I think it's really important that, I mean, as I said, capital is something we have ultimate control over. We can, or not, when I say we, I mean the FinCom, in terms of what to put in. But I really think there needs to be some level of a placeholder in there for the Voc amount, even if we don't know, so that the FinCom has an appropriate amount to know an appropriate amount that they're dealing with. And it's not going to be 712. We know that because of the 2 TBDs.
Right.
Does that make sense?
You know, it does, Chuck, but certainly we can also do that in April. There's no magic about doing it now, but perhaps more to the point, we really need to be careful about how we budget this winter.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Ed.
Oh, you're welcome, Chuck. Thanks for the question. Andrew, I see your hand raised.
Thanks, Ed. I guess my question really is to kind of everyone in the meeting right now as to maybe more so John and the select board and Chuck and Bob. Was there anything in the past, 6 months outside of the reductions that we made that got brought up in the past 6 months as additional items from the community outside of here that need to be taken into consideration? Maybe this would probably more so brought up to the select board or even to the school committee with additional curriculum or things along those matter that they see coming up in fiscal 21 or even fiscal 22, revamping of a curriculum or new purchases that may be needed that they're not foreseeing in the past 6 months.
I was wondering if I may add something, Ed?
Of course.
So one of the things, and Bob mentioned it, and we have similar situation on the school side. We have currently these federal grants that are ending on December 31st, which means there are things that we can spend that are, and it's COVID related. All of the COVID expenses we can apply to those grants up until December 31st. After that, we do not have a funding source. And one of the biggest things that we're going to see needed after December 31st that we will be able to pay for out of the COVID grant up until then is cleaning and disinfecting, additional cleaning and disinfecting. And I'm sure the town side would be the same. So it's just something to keep in mind.
And Ed, I can speak on behalf of the town that I spent about an hour and a half this morning with the vice chair of the Board of Health, and any request from Health or Board of Health would be a high priority. It's just a little early to determine what that might be. How much of it's this year, how much of it's in a future budget is still completely unknown. But we're working towards getting good information.
Bob, if I could piggyback on that, we had a conversation earlier this week about a town meeting warrant article being able to tackle any Board of Health budget additions or health department additions for FY21 for November.
Ed, if I could just add also, in terms of thinking about other needs and things like that, one of the high priorities that the select board has been talking about is listening and finding out what some of those priorities are. I think that the board is fairly convinced that fewer new capital projects, not maintenance, but new capital projects probably make sense for now because we're not sure where the priorities really should be, what the requirements are going to be. But in terms of taking care of residents and coming up with more program-oriented kinds of things, don't know what the answer is yet, but to go out and actually ask and find out and see what things we can do. And, I think of human and elder services, there may be some recreation oriented kinds of things that would fit into there as well.
Another possibility, not for FY21, but for FY22, is something that Carlo and I have been working on as co-chairs of the ad hoc committee on human rights. But this would come by way of a library budget request for a director position for equity and social justice. But that would not be coming before November town meeting. That would likely be coming before April town meeting.
Ed, if you don't mind, if I ask some follow-on questions to their comments.
Of course.
John, in relation to the budget ending, or let's say the money essentially as of right now being projected as stopping in December 31st, with the reopening kind of schedule projected out for schools, do you have a general idea what is the current expense right now, or the current demand for the cleaning, and projected in line with kind of the reopening or the return of certain grades and or students back into in-person learning, and how that affects one another?
That was a multi-part question.
Yes. So long story short, what I'm trying to get at is we have of reopening the schools and getting the students back to in-class learning. So in relation to that, I would assume that and correct me if I'm wrong, I would assume that the cleaning would increase, or the cleaning services would increase or be split up in order to capture everything you need to conduct school in person in the sequence that we have the return schedule. And I think that's projected past December 3rd or 31st. So we should be able to have some general idea of what that might cost after the first of the year. Is that right?
Yes. So we're working on that number now. We actually met today to talk more about that. And I know Gail's on the line and she can talk about the number more. Just to give a context, we do have kids in the building right now. Our preschool, kindergarten, and high need students are in. A lot of staff are coming in to teach their remote classes from their classrooms. We are starting our misting disinfection this Friday because we're now on that cycle where Fridays are remote learning days and kids will be coming in Monday through Thursdays. And so that's going to now start. We're going to start doing all of the cleaning and disinfecting. We are planning, and I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow night at school committee. We are planning to bring back several grades in mid-October, and our goal is to get back everyone by the end of October. So that in a hybrid model, which means we'll have half the kids in the building at one time, Monday through Thursday. So obviously the increasing cleaning will start ramping up now starting now and going through the month of October and continuing on. So I know Gail's on the line if she wanted to give some specific numbers.
So I'll actually, thank you. I almost asked Mark if it was okay if I spoke, but this is the wrong meeting for that. Sorry.
No offense, Gail. No offense at all. You can always go to Mark. He speaks for all of us, really, I think, at the end of the day.
He's the first person that came up in my tile Brady Bunch grid. So we actually met earlier today. John, Joe Huggins, and I have been spending a good amount of, there's nothing like some great disinfecting talk every day of the week. So, especially when you're an accountant. So we actually met earlier today. We actually met with the head of the cleaning company that we use. So we are in the process of looking at how many additional hours a day we will need across each of the schools as each grade level comes back. So for us, what we're looking at, just to give a little context to this, we have our traditional custodial crew. So for the most part, we have 2 custodians at each building. We are working with shifting their hours as well to get day coverage. So as more students come back into the buildings, what we're looking at is the additional cleaning of restrooms, high touch areas, to make sure that we are getting to those frequently throughout the day. And as you can imagine, the more people that come into the building, the more frequently you have to get to those areas. We also have the added cleaning of all of the lunchroom areas. So because we are doing the 6-foot distancing, we are spreading our lunchrooms out between the number of lunches as well as locations. We also have to ensure that we are disinfecting and cleaning between each lunch period. So we are in the process of gathering all of those hours per building, per grade as it comes back. So we are hopeful that over the next couple of days, we'll have some very good estimates that we can discuss with John, with Bob and Sharon, as well as with school committee. We are very fortunate that we have a sizable grant that will cover us through 12/31. So any of the grades coming back, we have that funding covered. What's interesting is I've participated in some of the calls that Bob mentioned, as well as calls on the DESE side. All of the grants are ending as of December 31st. There is some talk about whether or not another stimulus package will come out that may extend those into next year. My concern is that they will tell us on December 20th that the grant has been extended, at which point we will have already spent the grant. So we are trying to utilize the grant funding to the best use possible, looking at all the funding sources, but we're also trying to hold back some of the spending in case they do allow us to carry it into next year, because some of the items we would do, we would delay that if we're able to carry the grant into next year. So we are, now that we have dates for some of the grades, we're meeting again, I think Friday, to look at costing out what next year will look like for the cleaning. But we do know that there will be a pretty decent number that we're not able to do with just the custodial staff we have. And adding staff right now does not appear to be the right answer, because we do not know how long this is going to continue. So whether it's all 6 months of next year or just a portion of it, we feel that outsourcing it at this point is the best alternative for us.
Thank you, Gail.
So Andrew, any more parts to your 14-part question?
Yeah, sorry, Ed. Actually, yes. So Gail or John, in relation to everything that was just said, with the 6-foot distancing, with the additional requirements, there's obviously reduction in space and or reduction in some demand and some capacity, correct? That may, does that reduce the budget in some sense?
It actually, believe it or not, does not, because a couple of items, we have the remote students, but also as we bring more students back, one of the items that is a bit of a challenge is we are having the concept of a satellite classroom. So while we might be bringing back 20 students in a grade, in order to fit them, we have to have 2 classrooms for those students, whereas historically we would have had 1. So we also have staffing for satellite coverages. So we are working through a lot of that. People have also asked us about transportation, because obviously we have less students that we're transporting, but the bus capacity is significantly reduced when you're thinking you can only have 1 student per row, potentially every other row on the bus. So your busing capacity is also significantly reduced as well. So a lot of the areas we would have thought we had savings, we really do not. But we were very fortunate with even we did have a lot of savings in special ed based upon transportation and other items that happened, that we positioned ourselves very well last year with a lot of the PPE that we needed to acquire. We made significant headroads into that. We were also a lot of the, again, the accountant trying to be a facilities person, a lot of the misting machines that we're using this year, we were able to acquire them last year and get them in before the end of the year so we could start testing them out. So we do feel we positioned ourselves for a lot of the sort of one-time expenses, but there aren't, I so far have not seen a lot of significant savings this year because of how the year is playing out with needing more staffing. We have a lot of leaves we're covering, so we may have people on paid leaves where we're backfilling them. So we've sort of got double salaries hitting as well, so that there's a lot of moving pieces 2 weeks into the school year.
Right.
And Andrew, if I can just add to that from the town side, I guess the best analogy I can think of is I had a former boss many, many years ago that said the key to life is be a duck. And I didn't really know what he meant. So he said, you have to look very calm above the water, but you can paddle like hell below and no one knows. It is so hard to tell what's going to happen tomorrow. To try to figure out what to do at November town meeting for this year is difficult, and to try to do a budget over the winter seems impossible at this point. You know, I could go over a couple things where we're saving money. One of them is in health insurance, but then I can equally say, well, our unemployment bills are much higher. It is so hard to know what the future holds, both short-term and long-term. And I think all of us just need to sort of pick a spot on the horizon and kind of do our best and understand that there's going to be ups and downs along the way. But I think, you know, John and Gail said one thing exactly right, that we're in no position to add staffing except very, very carefully. You know, and we'll certainly approach it that way. And, you know, if we need to add, we're going to have to subtract. We're just going to have to be really careful. But we don't want to take away a service that may not be used today that much, but could be very useful as it used to be in 6 months. So that's a real challenge right now to figure all that out.
So Bob, it sounds like to me, based upon, this is kind of my takeaway from what's been said, is it's less upon where we want to return the money and more so of how much free cash we're comfortable spending, right? So, and I say that because there's a lot of unknowns out there, and you would never want to take away from one only just to get it back at the end and not need to take it away, right? And then you end up using the free cash anyways, which I think was one of your first questions that you posed, to saying how much free cash does FinCom feel comfortable spending? Because we could do a conservative budget and then be cutting things or not adding things to the budget that inevitably we need, that at the end of the year, we end up getting that money back because we didn't spend it anyways. So I just wanted to make that last statement before I key off, because it seems like there's a lot of other people waiting in turn. So thanks, Ed. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, everyone.
And just to follow up on a question FinCom asked last week, or last meeting rather, and Andrew just sort of touched on. In terms of our annual town meeting and postponing or delaying it, we can't technically delay it, but we could certainly adjourn the town meeting to a date further into the calendar year in May or June. It seems prudent at this point for John and I to continue our budget processes as we always do, and to have, you know, a budget for FinCom to look at, you know, early next spring as is required. We always want to keep an open mind, though. You know, do we have enough certainty in the budget process? I can't imagine we're going to have a state budget for the next year, this winter. We don't have one yet for this year. So, you know, I'll work on the flexibility part. So it's not like you have to solve everything this fall, is really what I'm saying. You know, we can address this all year. We can continue to work together. If it helps to push the budget part of town meeting further into the calendar year, we figure out a way to do that. We just have to kind of be flexible, I guess is the simplest thing. So I just wanted to make sure FinCom knew that.
That was what we talked about last meeting, right, Bob, is that there's nothing that states that you have to do it in November. It has to be by a certain, up until, we always did that because it was historically what we did, but there's nothing that that said you had to do it as of that certain date, correct?
Well, there's things in the charter that specify dates of when the school committee needs to turn over a budget to the town manager, balanced or otherwise, and then the town manager has to turn over a budget to the finance committee that's balanced. And I want to say it's March 1st or thereabouts that I'm supposed to give it to FinCom. For many, many years, we've given it earlier, no later than mid-February, and you've started your meetings in mid-February. And, and so we do want to hit those requirements, I think, since they are in the charter. But, in terms of final decisions and future flexibility, we should just stay open-minded.
So I see the next hand is Karen.
Thank you, Ed. I have a question for Bob. It's going back to something we said earlier. And I just need a point of clarification. We're talking about spending some money, taking a look at the wetlands analysis over at Camp Curtis Guild. Why are we doing that? I'm not sure that. I think that might predate my tenure on the select board.
There's three projects. Well, there's two projects that involve wetlands that were on the capital plan and were pulled back. One was Simon's Way and one was Camp Curtis. What the board discussed as part of the draft goals discussion, which you haven't finished yet, was put both those things back in. So when you finalize my goals, you may change your mind. The issues are similar but not identical. Simon's Way has already been marked out, as I understand it, by a wetland scientist, and our conservation administrator has walked it and he said the work is good. So the legal work on that parcel is different. On Camp Curtis, nothing has been done. So, we can only do that with the permission of the state. We had a meeting with staff on Monday, which seems like a long time ago. And our best guess is the state's not going to let us do it and pay for it. But the state, and this we'd have to work through DCAM, that the state will actually pay for it and then find a way to charge us later. But who knows? We don't know. If it's not in the capital plan, we can't undertake the work. So, I'm open-minded to what the select board finally comes out on that, but we are prepared to push both of those forward if that's what you decide.
Okay.
In order to assess the land at Camp Curtis for what is possible, we absolutely need to do some wetlands work.
So is a sale imminent? I thought that was kind of up in the air. What I'm going to back up even further. What precipitated us to even consider spending money on Camp Curtis Guild?
Because the board asked for it a couple weeks ago. Unless you mean further back.
I think I mean further back. Yep.
Economic development to get out of the parcel that Public Works is in and open up that space for further development down at Walker's Brook. Much more likely to be commercial down there, not residential. So that's an ongoing discussion for, 7 years or something.
Yeah. Okay. I hadn't heard anything recent. Well, hey, I'm all in support of letting the state pay for it, and we'll figure out whether we want to move forward later.
Actually, there is more current information, if I could just add to that, which is that in considering the project, it would require that the state allow us to get a long-term lease on that land. The state not only said that they were very interested in doing that, and this goes back several months, but very recently, Bob, just a couple of weeks ago maybe, they actually reiterated their interest in doing it. So, one of the big hurdles has always been, well, we could never get that land. We'd never be able to get it. And the state actually is in favor of us doing something there. And again, the only way to pursue it and understand what might or might not be possible would be to do some of this early conservation work.
I think, Ed, I apologize, Ed.
No, if it's on topic, go ahead. Go ahead, Vanessa.
Thank you. So I think before we allocate funding in order to do wetland work, or we agree to the state's conditions, whatever cost that may be, that then we are then required to pay back the state for those reviews. I think we need to do a little bit more legwork on the realities of moving forward with a project there. We are in a very different place now than we were when this project initially came up. I was a big proponent of this. I now have reservations. Given broader financial implications right now with the pandemic, I think this merits a little bit more discussion before we dive ahead. I don't know what the other board members think.
Yeah, I would agree.
So I'm actually very strongly in favor of doing the work now. I think it's a great time to do it. It's a nice quiet time, and it lets us know a lot of information about whether or not the ideas that have been discussed are even possible. And I don't think that there's legwork on the town side that can answer it in the same way. Even if we had a plan, without that information, I don't think we can go forward.
We could talk about this offline. I think the state, no matter what they want to do with that land, may be in a position, the similar position that the town is in. You need to do the work on your own land and pay for it. And whether someone else is going to reimburse you later, that's something to be said. I can't imagine that's a munitions place. I think they're going to find some other things there. But okay, maybe. Thank you for the clarification. I just didn't understand the history, the more recent history.
Mark, it might be worthwhile for us to take this offline because there's a lot of people besides us on the call.
Okay, so next hand that I saw it's Marianne. But Jean, you had your hand up. Did you put it down or did I miss it?
I put it down. Somebody asked the question that I was going to ask.
I just wanted on record that I actually noticed something that was up and then went down. That more than anything else.
I would just be on record that Ed is doing a great job tonight.
No check is in the mail, Karen. Thanks. So Marianne, you're next up with your hand raised.
Hi, thanks. I have one question on the town side and one on the school side. And I'm hesitant to ask the town question because Bob said he was not going to add new staff. But I noticed in the packet for the select board meeting yesterday that the two former chairs of the Board of Health were strongly recommending that they need a health director. And I don't know if that was more reflective of, okay, the COVID meeting intensity was really a lot in the first 6 months of the year, and now it's ramping down, and there's a new chair. But I don't know if there was still a thought, given it wasn't just COVID stuff that they were raising in their letters, whether that was a position that was going to be on the table to add, because they did bring up good points about the level of commitment and just the other things that the position had to oversee.
Yeah, I agree with all that. What I mentioned earlier was that I met with the current vice chair. There wasn't a chair yet. There will be soon. And, I want to defer to the Board of Health's discussion and the current Board of Health, no disrespect meant. There's no question they need something added, some resources. They're just not in a position to say what that is. The current vice chair proposed a longer term path to get there, but we discussed alternatives today. And all I said to her was, obviously for the pandemic, if you will, money's no object. And for the long term, money will be given a high priority to health. I can't say unlimited. So I don't know. I don't have a time frame on when they'll solve what they want.
Okay, so it wouldn't have to be in
It could be a November town meeting request. It's just too early to know. Or it could be a request over the winter for the next budget. There is a surplus of funds in their account meant to give them some flexibility. So again, there's a lot of juggling going on in conversations with no solution yet.
Okay, thank you. And my school side question kind of, just picked up on something Gail said, where she mentioned that right now, due to the leaves, we're paying double salaries. I just was wondering what's the impact on the fiscal year 21 budget from double salaries? Like how many, I know there's the federal coronavirus, I forget the acronym for the Family Leave Act, where they get like 2/3 salary after a certain number of weeks. But what was the budget impact from the leaves? How many double salary leaves are we talking?
Is it okay if I jump in?
Yeah, that's a
I'll ask Ed. I'll ask Ed this time if I should
No,
jump in.
just ask Mark. Just ask Mark. You're going about it all wrong, Gil.
It was a school question.
Mark nodded, so I'm just going to go with it.
Perfect. That's excellent.
So, Marion, we're actually in the process. We're still going through looking at some of those leaves. Some people have put in for them. Some people are still applying for them. But as we historically have had, we've also had some turnover. So we've had salary savings. So we're in the process of going through looking at, and we do have vacancies as well. So we're sort of netting a lot of those together. So as of now, we feel comfortable that between the vacancies, the salary savings, we, as of right now, I am not aware of any retirements. So we have savings for some of the retirement buyouts that we had budgeted as well. So right now we're looking that we feel comfortable from a salary standpoint that we're able to fund all of that within the salary budget. But John and I are reviewing those spreadsheets almost on a daily basis as we're getting new requests and looking at how we're filling some of them. We do think it's going to be an ongoing item because some people, it'll depend upon how some of the hybrid models come in and whether or not everyone has submitted for those leaves as of this point in time. But I know that we've been giving updates each school committee as to where we are with that. And I know we have another update planned for tomorrow night as well.
All right. Thank you. That's all from me.
Thanks, Marion. Just on that same subject, just to be able to kind of follow on, is there a date, kind of out there that, and again, I know there's so many things in flux, and so I'm sure this is a terrible question to ask, but is there a date, for you and Dr. Doherty that's circled where you would, there's a line as far as leaves and things of that nature?
Can I say that date was like August 28th? No. I think the tricky part about this is that this is a federal program that, I don't want to misspeak, John might be able to correct me. I'm not sure it has an actual sunset date yet, and I don't know if Bob would know this either, if it goes through 12/31 or if it was extended. So the tricky part about this, in all honesty, is that we cannot give a date. This is similar to what I would akin to an FMLA. I can't tell someone they have to tell me a year before they're expecting that they're expecting. So this is a scenario where you could come to me tomorrow and say you have a childcare issue that just came up that qualifies under the leave. I cannot decline you a leave. So unfortunately, until the federal program ceases, we don't have a definitive end date. I would say our end date is probably when we implement our full hybrid schedule, because at that point we will know whether or not the staff can come back. A lot of it, if you think about what's happening in other communities, I'll pick on a couple because everyone picks on my own community. So Wilmington may have had a plan in place to start live. Lowell had a plan in place to start live a day before they started classes. They pulled the plug and went remote fully. So we may have staff that live in Lowell that thought they were okay because their children were in school that found out 2 days ago that their children are home. So it is a lot more complicated because each scenario is dictated by a personal set of circumstances, and it is a federal program that we have to abide by.
And on the town side, we had the exact same question of John and Gail earlier in the week, because we're responsible for the benefits portion of the budget, and it would have been awfully nice if they could just say, "Oh yeah, as of November 1st, everything will be fine." But it's be flexible. We'll do the best we can, and we think those budgets are okay, so it's not a concern.
I have about 80 other questions, but I don't think any of them are going to be relevant for this. It's not, they're not financial. It's just on this, this whole piece of it is, it's so intriguing, but I'll move on to other kind of questions that are out here. Mark, I see you're next.
Thanks, Ed. I think that one of the themes that seems to be pretty clear is this idea of flux and flexibility, and the notion that some things are going to come up. We don't know which ones they are necessarily at this point, but something's going to come up. And I just was thinking through the notion of maybe there's almost like a min and a max that would get established, and thinking about how much free cash to assign. And I'm thinking first for fiscal 21. All right, so for 21, we've got that area that's a little bit unclear. And one of the questions, Andrew, you brought up was, how much free cash, do we want to spend? Or Bob, actually, you brought it up, and Andrew, you were tackling it a little bit. And maybe there's a notion of here's how much we want to spend, and knowing that there's this flux, and we know that it might take more. So the amount we'd be comfortable spending is X, but at this point we're at some lower number. Typically in the past, the way things have been done is to say, FinCom comes out and says, okay, take 1.5 million and plug it into the budget. And that's the comfort level. And then, things shake out differently. I'm almost wondering if it would make sense to think about, here's where we see it now, and here's where we appreciate there is going to be some flux, and there's some amount that we're kind of thinking about is kind of in that band now. So if something comes up, obviously it gets discussed and goes through all the processes, but it wouldn't be quite as surprising. The problem is if you just take everything now and say, let's minimize the use of free cash, invariably something will come up. It'll be pretty substantial as a guess. And then you get a little bit more shock factor that goes with it. So I just was kind of wondering if it's almost more of a band or a range that makes some sense. Clearly, you need a budget number. You can't have, it could be A or it could be B. You got to pick one. But then have an availability of up to B or a comfort level of up to B. Just a thought that I wanted to throw in.
Any kind of question, comment on that piece from Mark?
Mark, Andrew, I think you hit the nail on the head there with that question. It looks like we're spending 2.1 projected right now, correct? From what we were looking at the slides, that we would need to make up, right, Bob? You muted.
Sorry. Yeah, that's correct.
So, right now we're sitting at just over 16%. The requirement's 7? And I think this question comes up almost every year of what percentage are we comfortable at sitting at for youth and as to hold, because I think prior to the pandemic we had several discussions of saying, hey, we have a very healthy free cash in FinCom. What can we do for growth of the town overall? And we brought this up, several times. I think now the question needs to be turned to, I think what Mark said, what is our left and right limits? Can we say we're okay with spending 5 million, to a certain extent? And I think, how much is too much? I think a percentage needs to be, I think there needs to be a yield of us saying, this is where we're comfortable spending based upon our projected 16% that we have in there, which is extremely healthy. It's over double of what is required, and where we foresee the budget, 5 years from now. Right now we're talking about 2 years, but projecting out 3 years, 4 years, and 5 years, there are going to be some capital projects that need to happen. There are going to be further discussions with development of schools or reorganization of school buildings that need to happen, and where free cash, this has to come up early, sooner than later. Whether it comes up in November, it will eventually come up, of how much free cash we have in there, and the town will eventually say, hey, why do we have 17 million or 16% sitting in free cash. What are we doing with that 16% to either earn us additional money or earn us equity within the town? I'll leave it to the rest of FinCom to chime in on that, or even Bob, where your professional expertise would say in comparison to the communities around us.
I mean, I think, maybe just kind of following on that point, I had a, kind of a thought on it, based on what Mark was saying, what you were just saying, Andrew, too, is that, again, I think, when Sharon was kind of going through and talking about the, just in and of itself, the state aid, and, if you account for, make the adjustment, based on the minimums that they proposed or not. I mean, maybe that's the thought process that you look at as far as, free cash, and is that instead of, I think where my head was at is that, okay, well, don't use it, don't, ignore, that, and be much more conservative because, you don't necessarily may not have the trust of, of where the state's going to get that, to be able to fulfill their promise, back to, to us with so many things. But maybe the other way to be able to look at it is this, whole idea of, that's one of the ways that you supplement with free cash is in case of that, or in case of, a number of different things that could fall, or happen. That's why you have the, the min or max as far as what you use within free cash.
Ask a question about the min and max idea? Because I think there's something about it I don't understand. And Mark, if I can ask you to just clarify your thinking. Are you saying that the guidance would include a min and max, but then the ultimate budget couldn't, right? The ultimate budget. So you're just sort of saying between now and the spring, when town meeting approves a budget, there'll be flux and change and new expenses and potentially new revenue changes to the good or to the bad, we don't know. So you're saying communicate out to the public that we're going to be very flexible.
Partially, yes. I think that there does need to be a budget. So, and this has been thought out for a good 5 minutes, just to be clear. The min might be kind of the level that's used for the budget. But one of the things that always comes to FinCom is how much would you be willing to spend? In the past, usually that amount has been, as Bob says, between $1 and maybe $2 million in total. Right now it looks like it's at 2.2. If you kind of accept all the numbers that are in there and you have a little bit of a surplus. And we can kind of either decide, well, we can reduce the state number, we can put it back into free cash. All we're doing is deciding which risk we think is most likely, or spread it across them all. Free cash really is the buffer in a lot of senses. So one decision could say, let's be as conservative as we can, and we'll use free cash for everything else. In fact, you could do that on the other side. Let's be as liberal as we can, and we'll use free cash as the way to kind of save it. It's a different year. I don't know that any of us can say which of those numbers, what things do we need that we don't know today, which of those numbers is right that we've estimated and which isn't. So I think either you allocate it, as Bob suggested in the beginning, here's what it's either OPEB or it's free cash or it's a third category. That's kind of one approach. The other is to kind of say, there's a range that we're comfortable with. Let's start with the minimum level. Let's plug that into the budget with the understanding that we see that there could be several $100,000s of unanticipated needs, whether it's the school department cleaning budget that's going to come in a bit later, or it could be other activities as well. I'm trying to figure out how do you decide, what number to change, and at the end of the day, it's all going to adjust free cash up or down anyway.
Right. Okay, I need to think about it a little bit more, but it's an interesting idea. I think my instinct is to more take what we have now, give guidance the best we can, but somehow in communication to the public, town meeting, just somehow communicate out, just to your point, this is a very, very unusual year. And the one wonderful thing we have is this very excessive free cash balance. So I'm confident that whatever unexpected things come up, our town's actually in a good position to handle them. But to your point, I think anyone who wants right now to say, well, cleaning the schools is going to run this much money. Well, unless there's an uptick in the winter and kids go remote for 2 months, in which case it'll be less. There's no way to predict it. There's literally no way to predict it. So I think my instinct from a communication standpoint is to just be honest about that and say, luckily, we're in a great position. Whatever comes up, we're going to be able to weather it as a community, but we just don't have the clarity into the future we typically do because of COVID. So I'm going to sit with it a little bit. Thanks.
Those are great points, Gina. I mean, I'll echo them because I think, we were kind of talking about it, and all the things that came up my head was spinning. There's this, there's that, there's, that one's one way, one's the other way. So there's just a lot to digest. And my sheet here is full of head scratchings of all of us, of all the things we talked about. So, I couldn't agree more.
Ed, I've got a question. So didn't we add 150,000 to the FinCom for discretionary spend? I don't know what it's called, but didn't we add so that if we needed some funds, FinCom?
You have 300,000 in your reserve fund. More typically, you had 150 or less. But that's not so much discretionary spending as unexpected expenses, if you will.
Right, but is that in the budget though, Bob?
Yes.
So if we don't spend it, that would add 300,000 to the 600 then, right?
If you don't spend it, it goes back to free cash at the end of the year.
Yeah, so.
And then you get it again the next year, more or less.
So Mark, I think we do have built in a little buffer here already in the budget.
Yeah, I think you definitely, you do in the form of that reserve account that's there for stuff kind of in between town meetings, if you will. So that's there. And there's even, in case of real emergencies, if it went beyond that, there's the ability, I think, for the select board and FinCom to meet together, or maybe it's select board and school committee. Sorry about that. I think that, or maybe it's all three, to talk about it and even get more money. But at the end of the day, we're kind of talking about a buffer. It's almost like we're saying there's a COVID buffer. And instead of creating a brand new COVID buffer account, I'm wondering, to your point, Mark, maybe we already have them. And maybe one of them is the FinCom reserve and the other one is free cash, which is obviously the bigger one. So don't, we're kind of saying, gee, where should we play with it? We know that we need some money. We just don't know how much and we don't know where it's going to get spent. For the purposes of the budget, that doesn't work. The budget has to be the budget. You need some numbers. Here's the spending. It's targeted to this. And then there's kind of saying, okay, and if it goes above that, what do we anticipate that might be? How much do we think it may bounce from that? And that would be
the 300 is in the budget though, right, Bob?
Yeah, you have a balance of 300,000 right now.
So to interject, Mark, a little bit, to give an example, what Ed and Mark were just saying, what Mr. Dockster was saying was, right now it's assumed that there's $1 million grant, right? If we make an assumption that we use that from free cash instead of getting the grant, under the assumption that we don't get the grant, and we allocate the free cash for $1 million, if we get the grant, that free cash comes back to us, right? But if we don't get the grant, the money's already allocated from free cash to readily use versus having to come back anyways and ask for free cash if we don't get it. It's apples to oranges, and I think we're all dancing around the same questions as far as like use versus allocation.
And I think, Mark, your point is very good. Having a higher FinCom reserve actually makes a difference in this discussion. So when it was 150,000, the few times I can remember using it were some overtime things for police and public safety. It needed to be drawn between town meetings, things like that. And 150 was getting really tight because if you had a big event, a big problem, that might not be enough. So town meeting agreed to raise it to 300K last year. That conceivably is a bit of a buffer to unexpected problems, and you can decide if that's the right number or if a different number is right.
Any more discussion on this point?
I think there are a couple of hands raised, Ed.
Yeah, no, yeah, I was just kind of, just running the course on that one, Nick. So I'll go to Ann. Ann, you next had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Ed.
Mhm.
I just wanted to give some more information to the question that Marianne had asked about the Board of Health, just to relay what I conveyed in last night's select board meeting. And if Bob has any corrections based on his conversation today with Carrie, please feel free to do so. My understanding is that Monday night, the Board of Health discussed trying to move forward with a consultant coming in to conduct a health department assessment, later to be followed by a community health assessment. This could result in recommendations which could include, but would not be necessarily limited to, hiring a health director. They reviewed and revised a scope of work for the consultant Monday night, specifying that this would need to be conducted by a consultant with experience working in health departments and assessing departments. They would be submitting that scope of work with a list of consultants for review by purchasing. Just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Ann. Nick, you had your hand up next.
Thanks, Ed. So going back to some of the points that I think Mark raised and even Chuck at a past meeting. So Chuck once said, and this is rainy day fund, it's raining, right? And that we're in extraordinary times, right? This is not business as usual. And so I'm trying to, as people talk, I wanted to share kind of the way I'm thinking about the question of, well, what's the right level of committing our free cash? And in my mind, just to put this out here, I don't have kind of like a recommendation or I haven't even made up my mind yet, but I just want to share a framework that I'm using that maybe would be helpful for the group or could be modified if I'm missing something. I'm thinking of this in terms of there's operating expenses, and we had a meeting in the past where we talked about kind of bringing those down by a certain fixed percent, kind of basically across the board, so that our burn rate, so to speak, as a town is going to be reduced some without significantly harming the people we serve. I supported that idea. I still do. Within that idea of operating expenses, I like Bob's point of retention being a priority over capital for equipment, without letting the equipment kind of be damaged to a point that we incur unnecessary waste or expense next time. So for right now, it's like machines take a backseat to people, and we want to, in my mind, prioritize retaining our people across the district, right? So that's a big priority for me. So operating expenses, I would say, I would favor keeping the existing reductions that we baked into our recommendations this year carrying forward, but with any additional expenses we need to add to allow those people to do their jobs, right? So additional cleaning, et cetera, et cetera. All these things people need to do their jobs in this environment. The second piece of it is the capital expense piece, and I kind of feel like that takes a back seat and takes a holiday until we can get through at least the next federal budget season and the next, and I mean beyond December 11th. I'm talking, well into we know what local aid is going to look like in January, February, right? And so and then the state budget piece, like we just don't know, and so we have to kind of like self-insure as a town, which brings me to the last piece, which is the reserves that we've talked about. We increased from 150 to 300K, kind of a reserve fund that FinCom a town meeting has given FinCom. I was probably using the wrong term here, but like jurisdiction over, right, to spend as needed. And there are other ways to access, the people's money that is sitting in free cash, right? And so I kind of feel like, just throwing out the question for the group, what is the downside of aiming too high on committing free cash to that reserve capacity, whether it be for the towns or the schools or FinCom or whatever body we want to commit it to have flexibility? So if we push free cash from 2.1 up to 2.5, which is what's rattling around in my mind, it's on the high end of precedent. It may even be higher than normal, but I don't feel that's inappropriate if that allows for a rapid response to meet the first objective of retaining our people, protecting our people, right? And not losing our capital investments to date. So to Bob's point, if we're going to lose a fire truck or something because we didn't do an oil change, that's an absurd example, I'm sure. But we don't want to give up on necessary service on our capital, whether it's buildings or machines or whatever, right? So that's the framework I have. I'm leaning towards committing more free cash to reserve capacity for the different functions within our government. And then I feel like if we aim too high and the expenses just come in much lower, that just goes right back into free cash, and we revisit it next year with hopefully a little more certainty around what external supports from the state and the federal government are going to look like. So I'll just leave that out there for the group. I hope it's helpful. Thanks.
Any comments based on what Nick just kind of went over? Let's go to the next hand. I appreciate that sentiment, Nick. You're good about articulating these things in a way that at least I tend to think about them. So I appreciate that. Carlo, I think you have the next hand up.
Thanks, Ed. I know we have a pretty big, we're in a good position right now with a 16.4%. And I heard a number of 7% mentioned earlier. What has been our goal or our average pre-COVID, maybe the past 5 years for our reserves?
Our reserves have been trending well above the 7% for the whole 8 years I've been here. So I feel like we tend to have healthy reserves. The 7% was increased from 5%, I want to say a couple of years ago from FinCom, just because we started to kind of think about the fact that for bond rating agencies, they're looking at double-digit numbers to get a AAA bond rating. So I feel like there is that kind of sweet spot that we're trying to get closer to reserve enough to keep a good bond rating, obviously. And so I think in my history here in 8 years, I feel like we have been in that, right around that 10, 12%.
Okay, thanks. So much has been said, and I don't want to repeat it, and I agree with a lot of it. And a lot of good points were made on the unknowns and COVID and cleaning and state aid, but as far as that 1 million that's up in the air, I would rather not even think about that until we get it. And I like a round number of 10%. I'm not on FinCom, but I think if we have a nice, and I'm glad Sharon said that about 10 to 12%. If we look at the 16.4 and use 10 as a good model around 10, and then I'm not saying let's spend the rest, but we need that buffer. Like Nick said, we need that insurance. We need so many things. And it's funny, Nick mentioned a fire truck example, and we do need a new fire truck. I think we need a ladder truck that we actually need. We'll keep on repairing the one that we have. So that we've been pushing that off, and that's kind of needed. I think at town meeting we approved it, but we haven't done it yet. So that's one example of equipment. So those are my 2 cents. I'd like to see at least 10% in reserves, and money needs to be spent, or emergency money. But there's even the 300,000 might not be enough for FinCom reserves right now. But it seems like it's adequate because it hasn't been spent. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Chuck, you're the next one to have your hand raised.
Yes, thanks, Ed. I guess I just want to, I'm a little confused, which is possible. So Bob, your original question to the FinCom was basically, what do you think we should do with that 712,000? And then when I heard the Mark's thing about min-max, when you described the min-max, were you talking within the confines of the 712,000 or using more free cash on top of that? I was confused with that. So I guess the question was for Mark.
Yeah, so this is Mark, sorry. The max conceivably could be a higher number. Or you could just say, no, we're gonna keep it within that range. So right now, I think free cash is at 2.2, and in some sense, there's an unallocated amount of 700,000. So you could either take down some of the assumptions, or reduce the use of free cash from 2.2 to, what would that be, 1.5? Yeah, so there's 712 that's kind of sitting, based on the assumptions that are in there, it looks like there is, what do you do with the 712? Do you leave it in the budget? And where do you allocate it? Or do you take it down somewhere? So leave it in the budget, could go into OPEB or capital or other categories or a new category. Or you could just take it, reduce free cash from 2.2, take that 700 out down to 1.5. And the min max was trying to kind of figure out where do you want to peg it for the budget? And, should it be, you take that 700 out, do you leave some of it in? You can't really leave it as just kind of, it's flexible. I'm not sure kind of where you put it. Can you put it in as a placeholder in OPEB? Probably not. I don't know. I was trying to figure out, instead of the FinCom deciding, well, let's take this one up by 200, that one down by 200. Is there a way to kind of say, hey, here's what we think is going to happen. Our preference is that, we spend 1.5, but we're willing to go up to 2.2. And for the budget, use the 2.2, which is where it is right now. The town meeting has to vote on something.
Well, I think that staff has come up with a number of 712, and us, I guess, being the school committee and the board shouldn't draw value judgments on that. Should let the FinCom go with that and let them make that decision.
No question. I think I was offering a possible way to think about it, versus just kind of saying, okay, the question was raised, what should we do with the 712? And so I was offering a suggestion on how to think about it, perhaps.
Okay, thanks.
Karen, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Ed. I had a quick question for the group at large. In terms of if we were going to maybe pull back on some capital or some services, just some temporary services that we can maybe predict won't be needed. Other things that we might need, if the summer we had outdoor dining, we were sticking around town, we're trying to keep our downtown alive. One of the things that we have discussed in the past, and we heard it last night at the select board meeting, is that you need access to the sidewalks. And I know from my previous discussions with Jane Kinsella, she says that she is at her max for sidewalk clearing, for schools even, and for just general downtown sidewalks. And last night we heard from the residents of Linden and Sanborn, considered part of the downtown, they're not able to be cleared. I might propose that we might consider providing in this winter of COVID, that we put extra resources in making sure that we take care of more of the sidewalks this year, so that people that are in town, the kids are riding their bikes now, they won't be doing that. They'll be walking and they'll need sidewalks to walk on. And part of that would, of course, be sort of enforcing what we already perhaps have in place. And but that's another side of the question. And you might all have some other ideas. What are the things that, we might need for this coming winter that normally we might not worry about so much because we have the ability to go to Florida, travel, do a lot of things.
Thanks, Karen. So I don't see any other hands raised at this point. I guess at this point, I just maybe we've heard from a lot of folks, but any other kind of kind of questions from folks within FinCom? I mean, you could have raised your hand, but I'll just kind of throw it out there. Is there any other kind of discussion or kind of points from from FinCom members? Okay. All right. So, kind of given that, and I'm kind of the same mind, as from Jean's point. um, again, there's a lot to digest here as far as, and things that, I think we all kind of need to, kind of take away and process a little bit. And it's kind of hard to be able to do that just kind of on the fly here. And so so I'm looking at, kind of agenda wise, we've kind of gone through and done the, kind of the major kind of reviews of the revenues and spending. And so I think it's probably, and Bob, we kind of talked about this a little bit as far as the future financial forums, but again, and if you can just, kind of refresh my memory for the next one, which would be October 7th, that's when we need to be able to make sure that we have voted on the town meeting articles, correct?
Yes, and I'd have to check, but I think FinCom has technically voted on many, if not all, of the debt authorizations. So it's really the stuff we're discussing tonight of how to balance the FY21 budget, if you will. And, we'll come prepared at your next meeting. You may as well review the whole capital plan just so you get a sense of it, and then can have a better perspective of what do we need now, what do we need next year, what can we push further down the road. And then if there's anything other than capital that you need more perspective of, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Because again, trends are too hard to guess. We know those two numbers of 50 and 75,000 are hard expenses we need to pay this year. We could do that in April. We don't have to do it in November. And we don't know if it'll happen in the future, although it would seem that both of them will continue. But the only number that's essential to do something with, let me just share the screen again, just to be sure. And Sharon, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe town meeting must act on the 367,300 new growth and use it in some way, or we don't get it added to the tax base. That's my understanding. Is that right, Sharon?
Mm-hmm. We do need to find a way to utilize that additional funding because it has been certified by DOR. So
everything else is optional.
Yeah, I mean, we could reduce our local receipts, some of our local receipts, to use that to balance it as well. So there's a lot of options there.
So given that, and again, and this is kind of out to the to the other members of the committee, is there other things that you'd want to to review, other types of information that you'd want in order to kind of help you kind of be kind of prepared to what we want to be able to review in next meeting? All right, good. I don't see any hands up and I don't see any comments. Okay. Okay. So given that, I mean, so just on that last point again, like when you were talking about the, the 300 number, and I don't know the exact number that you were just talking about, but but that kind of gets back to the, to what we were just talking about in general, is as far as, if you need to be able to figure out what to do with the 367, that, at its base, that's kind of part and parcel to what we were just talking about anyways, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Are you on mute, Bob? Or you may not be speaking. That's fine.
Technology was defeating me there for a while.
Perfect. I thought it was me.
No, I have my battles. At a minimum, I'd ask FinCom to, vote to accept the 367,000 of new growth on that screen and then offset in any way you want. As Sharon mentioned, you could reduce local receipts by only 367,000 instead of 530 and call it a day and do nothing else. But I'd suggest that that's the minimum that FinCom should agree to do. And anything else you do, I'm certainly very open-minded.
Okay. Again, as far as everyone else is concerned, I mean, are we, kind of okay, and kind of tabling this, thinking about it and coming back to the next meeting and having, kind of a broader discussion and ready to, kind of make some, kind of decisions as a collective, on those points? Is that, kind of general consensus of what we want to do next? Yeah, I didn't speak for anyone.
Asking us to make a vote tonight. Sorry, Ed.
I don't think we necessarily need to make a vote tonight. Correct, Bob?
No, I don't think you should, and I don't think you have to, and I really don't think you should.
Great.
We didn't post that as part of the agenda, so it technically would be better if we posted vote, something.
There was, just in terms of guidance, but this is obviously just speaking for myself, something you said very early on, Bob, way at the beginning of the meeting, was that you and I think the school department had looked at capital that had been cut, or that the needs have suddenly come up and they weren't anticipated. I really like the idea of using at least some for capital in two cases. One, if the need is real and it really shouldn't be put off, but two, because if it's a one-time expense, it's not going to cause a problem down the line. So I like the idea. It seems to me very neat or elegant if there are capital expenses that we really wish we had spent and will be good for the town. That seems like a very logical place to look. So, and you sort of talked through your process about, you didn't look at everything, but you really looked strategically at what we weren't going to do, but now we have bandwidth to do. And I'll just throw in a plug for anything that helps with potholes. It's a good thing. But I liked your thought process on that, and that would be an area I'll be interested to look at.
That'd be a second vote for DPW then.
Yeah, it would be good to see too is sort of future uses, anticipated uses of the free cash on large projects. I don't know if that exists over the next, 1 to 5 years where that could go. Because we're talking, if we talk about where it should be, but I don't know what large uses of that there are out there. It'd be good to see that. Do we have that anywhere?
Historically, Mark, FinCom has used free cash as kind of an annual balancing tool. And then occasionally during the year, there's a perhaps large capital item. I can't remember the largest, but it's certainly less than $1 million. But, we've never really gone in the direction of saying, in 2 years, we need a fire engine, a ladder truck that's $1 million. So that year we'll spend $1 million more of free cash. That's a direction some communities go in, or they have debt or capital exclusions. But historically, we've sort of just approached it as, tuck whatever your needs are into the capital plan and into the operating budget, and then, allocate a comfortable amount of free cash and off you go. Your policy does suggest that certain amounts of capital and higher cannot be put in the operating budget. It has to go to the voters. So if it's a big number, it can't be. By your policy, you can always change your policy, but if it's a big number, higher than $5 million, let's just say, it needs to be approved by the voters. Does that answer?
Well, it's sort of telling me that the free cash, it's not targeted towards anything, a capital project or anything, or debt service. There's nothing major out there for it to be spent on.
Historically, that is correct, but times change. Not to say it's the perfect solution forever.
Ed, could I just comment for a second?
Of course, yeah, please, Mark.
Mark, the other thing is that the last few years have shown that the free cash balance has grown to levels really never seen before, in terms of how high they are as a percentage or in dollars, either way. So to Bob's point, I don't think in the past it was ever considered, for anything other than kind of rainy day sorts of activities, where $1 million, $1.5 million got used to help support the operating budget per year, and we always regenerated that back. There may be different opportunities to consider now. I don't mean this instant, but going forward.
Phew. Yeah, I'm glad we're not. Yeah, I'm glad we're not opening up that can of worms now. I think it's it's a very kind of kind of salient point. Again, what you might have done, kind of historically, was based upon a balance that you had at that time, and now so many different situations have changed, and then that lends itself to to Mark's kind of original question as far as could we start thinking about it in that way. And almost to Bob, what you were saying, that some towns do it that way, and maybe they have a circumstance to do it, but we're in a different circumstance where it's not a bad thing that we do it that way. That we could do it that way. It's coming from a position of strength, not not weakness. And I don't know, and I don't mean that you might have mentioned that other towns do it and they're doing it out of a kind of a position of weakness. It's just we have that kind of flexibility to be able to do it. It sounds like. And that kind of lends itself to kind of almost a different way of thinking, whether it's our policy or whatever it is around that. But that's something else. I mean, I think that's a topic to be able to. I think that we should kind of collectively discuss, because I think it's a very interesting one. I think Andrew kind of mentioned something similar that we've talked about in the past as well.
If I could, Ed, I actually really agree with that. And I just wanted to say I'm interested in the conversation both Mark and Mark had. My one feeling, and I'm glad that Mark Doxer, you said at some point in the future, with COVID and all the uncertainty, it just doesn't feel like the right time to have that discussion. I think we're kind of in survival mode for the next 6 to 12 months. So I'm not sure this is the right time to have the discussion, but I definitely think given the balance that we have in free cash, it's a discussion that should happen. I completely agree.
So, Jean, you don't think we should have more things to talk about now? I think
as fun as this is.
I mean, I think COVID, it's size-wise. I mean, we probably could fit it in. No, I completely agree. But it's again, I think it's kind of structurally, it's a thing that we can be able to discuss, given the kind of positions that we're in now.
And for a later date, Ed, just when you and I were on the audit committee, going through the having the auditors review the town's financial statements, and we probed them and said, so here's our free cash balance. What do you think? And he said, well, initially he said it's a very large balance. And then we pushed him harder and he said, let me take that back. It's a large balance, not a very large balance.
Exactly. Yep. I definitely, that when we were talking about it, I'm like, well, it's, what I mean? Like, you hear a third party, kind of say it in that regard. It's not like it's, we're, kind of, that much different, or and it's not egregious, I guess is the way I was thinking of it. Any other, kind of comments or questions, that we want to kind of go through? Nothing else. All right, and so then on our side, we're scheduled to meet again on the 7th. Correct. That's the next. Yeah, that's 2 Wednesdays, right? So that's the next one on our side, correct, Bob? That we have.
Yes, and just to remind you, that's at 8 o'clock because we have another meeting before then. We not being all of you.
Sounds good. Okay. So we don't have anything else on the agenda, correct? Or is that I'm not missing anything, am I? We have to approve the minutes. Dang it. I'll tell you, this is, okay, perfect. All right. So did everyone had a chance to review the minutes?
Yeah.
That are out there. Any questions? Do I get a motion?
Motion to approve the
Hey,
minutes.
Ed,
Yes.
how many minutes do you have?
I think we only have one.
One.
Okay. The board went late last night. I was going to ask if maybe the rest of us could go.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Tom, do you have a motion?
Just let the FinCom adjourn first, then go crazy.
Were you thinking the other way, Vanessa, to have the other groups adjourn first and let the FinCom continue?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yeah, so go ahead.
Motion to adjourn the school committee.
Second. Tom,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Carla,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Chuck. Yeah. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, Carlo, would you happen to have a motion for the select board?
Sure, motion to motion to adjourn the financial forum with the school committee and the FinCom.
For the select board. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Thanks, Karen. We'll do a roll call quickly. Sorry, I'm looking at the screen. Carlo?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Vanessa?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Mark, yes. Thanks, folks.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Good night.
Be safe.
Good night. Okay, so now we get back to the real business about approving our minutes, and everyone else, letting everyone else go. So we have a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes from 9/9 as posted.
Thanks, Andrew.
Seconded.
Thanks, Mark. Oh, I gotta vote. Of course, okay. I'll go in the order of the screen. Mark,
Yes.
Mary Ann,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Dan,
Yes.
Jean.
Enthusiastic, yes.
Thank you, Dan. Did I do that twice?
Yes, again.
Oh yeah, this crazy screen. Of course, Nick.
Abstain. I wasn't there.
Yep, and Sean
Yes.
and Ed. Yes. So 8-0-1. Perfect. Meeting minutes. Oh gosh. Okay. All right. And then I will entertain any other motions at this point. I don't know if anyone has any. I'm not making any hints. We can talk all night if you want, but
Motion to adjourn.
perfect.
Oh, second.
Excellent. Thanks, Gene. All right, and I gotta vote this again. I love this part. Can we get back in person? Because this is terrible. Like going through this. This is but we have a COVID thing going. I get it. All right, we'll go through again.
Raise hands.
Mark,
Yes.
Mary Ann,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
I'll be back to you in a minute, Dan. Gene,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Andrew. I missed Andrew last time, didn't I?
Yes. Yes. Both.
I knew it. Oh God, I'm awesome at this. I'm so good at this. All right, cool. And Ed, yes. So 9-0
On both of them.
on both of them. Yes, just Jackie, just cover my mistakes, please, Jackie. Thanks. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I will never get better at this, but I'm having fun. Everybody, thanks, Bob. Thanks, Sharon. Really appreciate it. All the information, really, really great. Really appreciate it. And
If any of you have any thoughts, even though you've adjourned, just shoot me an email before the next meeting.
yeah, definitely. And keep me posted too. And I can, if you want to go through me or go directly, I'm fine either way. And I think that was the other thing too. Just on, actually, of course we've adjourned, but on the if you had any kind of edits on the emails and telephone, make sure that you give that to Jackie as well. And because just so we all have that too. But that's it, everybody. Thank you.